Hello everyone, it's your favorite bard, and welcome to another episode of Replay Theater. Today we're playing a deck that I've been waiting to drop on Master Duel, Labrynth. Playing Labrynth is like setting up a minefield and daring your opponent to take a move. It's extremely fun, and it denies your opponent a lot of advantage by triggering normal traps, which in turn activate your Labrynth effects. I'm really excited to get into the games on this one, so let's just hop right on into it. Our first game is against a duelist named Johnson, and he's on Cubics. Before this duel, I didn't know a lot about Cubics, but after researching it, I found that their general play strategy is to load their graveyard up with their spells and traps, which will in turn float into different things, and generally control the field by putting really annoying monsters on the field over and over and over again, like their level 1, who's a fiendish chain on legs. At this point, my Labrynth deck is a prototype and I'm testing out a bunch of different traps in it, and I'm not entirely too familiar with how Cubics works, so this is a bit of a learning game for me. I'm going first, and I've drawn Lovely Labrynth, which is a bit of a brick in your hand, so I'm going to use Chandraglier to discard her and set Labrynth from deck. Welcome Labrynth will get us a Lovely from deck, and the field spell adds a pop to Welcome Labrynth, making it so summoning Lovely immediately triggers her effect. I do a bit of a misplay here by immediately summoning Lovely. If I had waited to activate Welcome Labrynth after my opponent had a monster on field, I could have taken advantage of the aforementioned pop. Johnson leads with Reasoning, a card that I never know how to answer, because it seems that in the best case scenario they get a monster, and at worst they load their graveyard, which is what happens here. And then goes into a second Reasoning, because of course it's not a once per turn. He mills a few more spells and lands on Duza, the Meteor Cubic Vessel. Duza triggers and lets Johnson send a Cubic to graveyard. Then he activates Cubic Dharma and uses its effect to pitch a Cubic card and draw one. He banishes Cubic Karma Engraved to add a Cubic monster to hand, and he chooses Crimson Nova, the Dark Cubic Lord. I figure now's as good a time as any to start popping his stuff, so I use Dogmatica Punishment to send Elder Entity Entis from my extra deck to the graveyard to pop Bijam. This triggers unification of the Cubic Lords in my opponent's graveyard, which allows him to special summon a Cubic monster. My Labrynth effects trigger, so I'll activate Labrynth, then chain Lovely on field, then Chandraglier, then Entis in the graveyard in response. So pop. Add to hand. Pop a card in hand, not the Cubic Lord like I was hoping unfortunately. Special summon a Fiend. A second Bijam hits the field, our opponent sets a card, and then passes turn. That's a lot, and we're low on traps, so I'll use Chandraglier during the end phase to pitch Lord of the Heavenly Prison and set Welcome Labrynth. I'll lead by activating Welcome Labrynth to summon Ariana from deck, and adding the pop effect from Labrynth to pop my opponent's set back row. Ariana activates, letting me add a Labrynth card from my deck to my hand, and I choose Labrynth Setup. I activate the effect of Lovely to set a normal trap from grave, and I think Dogmatica Punishment will probably get me the most mileage. I activate Labrynth Setup to shuffle 2 of my Labrynth cards from my graveyard to the deck and set 2 normal traps with different names directly from my deck. Ice Dragon's Prison and Compulse should do a lot of good. During my opponent's draw phase, I decide to start picking off resources. I activate Ice Dragon's Prison to special summon a Bijam in graveyard to my field and then banish it and the Bijam on my opponent's field, getting rid of 2 problems and triggering all of my Labrynth effects. My opponent will activate Unification of the Cubic Lords in graveyard, and I'll chain Labrynth, then chain Lovely, chain Ariana, and chain Chandraglier. Add to hand. Draw 1. Snipe 1. Special summon, and my opponent gets another Duza, which triggers to send another Cubic Karma. Johnson uses Cubic Dharma on field to pitch another Dharma and draw one. He activates Karma in graveyard to add a Cubic to hand, and he grabs Crimson Nova. He banishes Dharma engraved to add a Cubic from grave to hand, and at this point, I'm starting to see what this deck does. Foolish Burial Good loads another Cubic Karma into the graveyard, which is then used to add Bijam to hand. My opponent reveals V-Jump, Duza, and Crimson Nova in hand to special summon Crimson Nova by his own effect. I activate Dogmatica Punishment targeting Duza, forgetting that it can't be destroyed since it was summoned by the effect of unification of the Cubic Lords. I send Entis in an attempt to pop as much as I can, but both effects basically do nothing. I bounce Crimson Nova back to hand, and my opponent goes to main phase 2, in which he reveals 3 Cubics to special summon Crimson Nova once more, because of course he's not a once per turn. My opponent passes. I use Chandraglier to pitch Chandraglier and set Welcome Labrynth from deck, and Crimson Nova's burn effect hits us both for 3k. During my draw phase, I fire off Welcome Labrynth to summon the 3rd Ariana from my deck, and because Crimson Nova is only protected from destruction by monster effects, I use my free pop to deal with them. My Labrynth effects all trigger. Duza gains 200, Chandraglier adds itself to my hand, Ariana draws and sets, and Lovely snipes. But this time I choose to snipe the Duza on field to give myself an opening. I use Lovely to set Compulse, anticipating Crimson Nova next turn, and set myself up for some big damage. But just as I'm about to deal the finishing blow, Johnson activates Cubic Ascension to summon his last V-Jump from hand, saving himself from lethal. During the end phase, I use Chandraglier to set Fair Welcome Labrynth from deck. My opponent uses Dharma to pitch Ascension and draws one, then uses Feather Duster to try and clear my field. But here's where it gets fun. I activate Compulse, targeting one of my Lovelies and send her back to my hand. My back row gets trashed, sure, but since a monster left the field by a normal trap, all of my effects trigger once more. Lovely trigger. Chain Ariana. Chain Welcome Labrynth. Chain Chandraglier. Then add to hand, set to field, draw then summon, and snipe one in hand. During the end phase, I pitch Chandraglier and Dimensional Barrier to set a 2nd Fair Welcome Labrynth from deck. Let's close this up. I use Lovely to set a trap from the grave, then set and pass. During the draw phase, I use Dogmatica Punishment to pop the last V-Jump by sending Wind Pegasus from my extra deck and trigger all of my Labrynth effects. Johnson does not want to go out without a fight, so he chains Ascension to my triggers. V-Jump is back. Chandraglier to hand. Welcome Labrynth to the field. Draw then snipe, and this is just a revolving door of all of our stuff floating into other stuff. It's beautiful. My opponent uses V-Jump to link into Linkuriboh. Enters battle, and I negate his attack, pop Cubic Dharma, and set Paleozoic Dynamiscus using Fair Welcome Labrynth. He passes. And I'm ready to end this duel, so I lead with Dynamiscus, pitching one to banish Linkuriboh, go through the Labrynth chain once more, then set one, and swing for game. That was a hell of a learning game. Our second match is against Sky Striker. So, having tried a couple of different configurations during the Duelist Cup, I've made modifications to my deck, and this one should run a lot smoother. I lead with Pot of Extravagance, to which my opponent responds with a Maxi. Womp womp, ain't summoning nothing, son. Sit back. I activate Labrynth, set everything, and pass. Drever leads with Pot of Desires, banishing 10 from the top of his deck to draw 2. He activates Sky Striker Mecha Hornet Drones, and now I know that I'm up against Sky Striker. I activate Welcome Labrynth to summon my Lovely and pop the token, thereby triggering my Snipe effect to pop an Effect Veiler in hand. My opponent normal summons Ray, and now the duel is off to the races. Ray links into Shizuku, and I use Dogmatica Punishment to try and remove it, hoping to send Entes to deal with the incoming Ray, but Drever activates Eagle Booster, making it immune to effect destruction. Cool thing about this reaction is that it gives me the ability to pivot by choosing to send Wind Pegasus at Ignister instead of Entes for future protection. Drever decides to try and ruin my day by activating one of my least favorite spells, Fusion Destiny, to fusion summon the boy himself, DPE. Fortunately for me, I'm well prepared for this scenario. I activate Ice Dragon's Prison to special summon Dasher from his graveyard and banish both him and DPE at the same time. And because Lovely Labrynth is on field, DPE cannot respond to my trap activation. Get banished, baby! My opponent moves to the end phase, and I use Trap Trick to banish a Compulse from deck and set a Compulse to my field. Shizuku activates to grab Sky Striker Mecha Widow Anchor from deck to hand, and knowing that it can negate and steal, I'm going to have to figure out the best way to play around it. I lead by bouncing Shizuku in an attempt to snipe Widow Anchor from hand. We got a 50-50 chance, so fingers crossed. Lovely to snipe, welcome to set, my opponent chains Ray to special summon herself, and here we go. Unfortunately, I hit Rose and not the Widow Anchor, but I still think we're in a good place. I use Lovely to set Ice Dragon's Prison from grave, then move to battle, forcing my opponent's hand to use his Ray effect to go into the likely one of Kaina, as opposed to letting him go into Shizuku to gain some card advantage. I set the Infinite Impermanence in my hand to the column he's using. I activate Welcome Labrynth, knowing that Widow Anchor is going to come down at some point, so let's do some work beforehand. Labrynth Archfiend hits the field, and the field spell adds a pop to Welcome, so we target Kaina. My opponent triggers Ray and Grave. I chain Lovely and Archfiend, and as predicted, here comes the Widow Anchor. But we're not through yet. We don't want him having both Lovely and Zeke or something, so we're going to use Ice Dragon's Prison to target the Ray in graveyard, summoning her to my field instead of letting him gain advantage. My opponent enters battle and swings into Archfiend, destroying it by triggering my Wind Pegasus engraved to shuffle Lovely back into the deck, leaving my opponent with one card in hand, and of course it's Mobilize Engage. He adds Ray and another card to hand, summons Ray, links into Shizuku, and sets one. During the end phase, I activate Infinite Impermanence, targeting Shizuku and preventing my opponent from adding anything to hand. This also triggers my field spell to special summon Archfiend from graveyard. Okay, so here's the plan. We aim for Shizuku using Ray. Activate Fair Welcome Labrynth to negate my attack and pop the face down, then swing for big damage with Archfiend. But the face down is Imperm and it's in the same column, so it both negates Archfiend and Fair Welcome. Ray smacks into Shizuku, and then, since I'm not paying attention to my lowered attack points, I lose Archfiend as well. Whoops. This looks bad, but we have Welcome Labrynth set, which will get us Lovely and a pop, so depending on what Drever draws, that might be enough. Drever links into Hayate and we hold tight. He enters the battle phase, and I activate Welcome Labrynth to summon Lovely. And our opponent chains Maxi. Not ideal, but we can do this. Lovely hits the field. Field spell pops Hayate. Ray triggers in graveyard, Lovely snipes the hand. And Welcome activates in grave. Our opponent links into Shizuku, and I have no way to stop the draw effect this time. So we move to my turn, and let's see what we can do. I activate Welcome and special summon Archfiend, using the pop to remove Shizuku. Lovely triggers on my field. Welcome triggers in the grave. Ray triggers in my opponent's grave, and I just noticed that almost no damage has been dealt in 7 whole turns. Oh my god. I activate Lovely to set Ice Dragon's Prison one more time, trying to think of the ideal time to activate it to deal with Ray with warriors and machines moving on and off the field. My opponent uses Ray to go into Kagari, and Kagari will grab Afterburners back to hand. I set Compulse and move to battle, smacking into Kagari with Lovely, then doing big damage with Archfiend. Finally, progress! My opponent leads with Afterburners, targeting Archfiend. But the cool thing here is that I can prevent it from resolving by bouncing Archfiend to hand with Compulse, thereby triggering my Labrynth effects. Lovely first, Field Spell second, Welcome third, set, Summon Archfiend, snipe a card, leaving my opponent with nothing. My turn. With nothing in hand or field, we're ready to swing for game, and Lovely seals the deal. Our last duel of the day is against Runick, which is possibly the most hated deck in the game at the moment. So our opponent, whom my Google Translate says is named I Super Source Batch, is going first. And I didn't draw as well as I would have hoped, but evenly matched is always a welcome sight going second. Our opponent activates Fountain, then summons Moonin, and pitches 1 to search Runick Allure. And oh, I have never felt so confident in my entire life. He passes, gains 1,000 life points off Moonin, and I am about to end this man's entire career. I move straight in and out of the battle phase so I can fire off my evenly matched, and our opponent opts to banish everything except the field spell. Archfiend triggers in my hand, and with my opponent having no hand, I opt to summon it. I then set 3 and pass. iSource plays Flashing Fire targeting Archfiend, and to prevent it from resolving its banish effect, I use Compulse to send it back to my hand. Since Flashing Fire doesn't destroy my Archfiend, it doesn't banish any cards from my deck. But Runick Fountain still triggers, allowing my opponent to shuffle up to 3 cards into his deck, then draw an equal amount. He shuffles 2 and draws 2. My turn is a quick one. I know that I can't give him anything to interact with, so I simply set 1 and pass. iSource plays Runick Slumber to summon a Runick monster from his extra deck onto his field, and he chooses Gary the Runick Fangs. Fountain triggers, and he shuffles 1 to draw 1. I draw into Chandraglier, and I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel here, but the plan isn't all there yet, so I pass. My opponent isn't satisfied being passive, so he activates Slumber to protect his monster with the end in mind to banish cards and maybe cycle cards using Fountain. He follows Slumber up with Golden Droplet, giving me a draw but then banishing from my deck. He then uses Fountain to cycle cards as predicted and passes. My turn. I draw into Chandraglier, and we're almost there, just need 1 more turn. I set Dogmatica Punishment and pass. I think that iSource is either getting wise to me at this point, so he sets 1 and passes. During his end phase, I activate Dogmatica Punishment, targeting his Gary. He responds with Slumber, trying to save his monster, but this is big brain time. Destroying it was never the end goal here. I activate Solemn Judgment here, mostly in an attempt to prevent him from chaining additional cards and protecting myself from mill. Solemn resolves, negating Slumber. Slumber's activation is negated, preventing the mill, and Dogmatica Punishment sends Entis from my extra deck to the graveyard, which I then use to pop Fountain and protect myself from Runick effects during my turn. I also use Chandraglier to pitch Chandraglier to set Welcome Labrynth and activate Archfiend in hand to special summon himself. Seeing an opening, my opponent tries to hit me with freezing curses, but thankfully I had Compulse on field to remove the target. And that adds Chandraglier back to my hand. Okay, so 2 Solemn Judgment is nice, but I think we can do without one in favor of the field spell. So I pitch it with Chandraglier, to which iSource activates There Can Be Only One. Yeah, real original there, but I don't need to summon more than 1 monster presently, so we're good. I do a small misplay here by activating the field spell and chaining Welcome Labrynth, making it so that Welcome resolves first and thus does not get the pop effect from the field spell. Whoops. I get Lovely onto my field, then use her effect to set Punishment, set Solemn, and pass. Our opponent leads by playing Terraforming, but I think we're ready for the field spell. And this next play is his undoing. He summons Max C and uses both of his on-field monsters to link into Nightmare Phoenix. Phoenix requires a discard before it can pop a back row, meaning that the last card in his hand after he pitches Runick Dispelling is the field spell. Big mistake, bucko. He targets my field spell and I chain Dogmatica Punishment. Punishment sends Entis, destroying Phoenix, and it all comes crumbling down. Field spell is destroyed. Lovely triggers, Welcome triggers, Chandraglier triggers, Entis triggers. Tikaboo is destroyed, Chandraglier is added to hand, Welcome sets itself to field, and Fountain is sniped from hand. iSource is now completely disarmed, and having lost it all, he surrenders the duel.